Welcome to Clean Air Action's podcast, Cleaning Up Dirty. We talk politics with non-toxic people. I'm Liz Green-Schultz. I run a political nonprofit called Clean Air Action.
And I'm Sean Hoffman, Legislative Director of Clean Air Action. Clean Air Action is the proud sister organization of the Clean Air Council, the oldest environmental and public health organization in Pennsylvania.
Together, we fight for your constitutional right to breathe healthy air. Over here at Clean Air Action, we fight dirty with clean. That applies to anyone who messes with our political and civil rights, including corporations and politicians.
Today we have Brian Regli on to talk about his experiences in Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's administration as Executive Director of the Office of Critical Investments and Chairman of the Board of PENNVEST, Pennsylvania's Infrastructure Investment Authority. Brian, thanks so much for coming on our podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
We're really excited.
This is going to be fun. I got my peanut M&Ms, I got my coffee, I'm ready to go.
Yes.
This is going to be a fun one. And since this is a political podcast and we like to talk about some spicy stuff, in case we need to eat our feelings, we keep snacks on hand.
I believe, folks, Liz is referencing these spicy gummy mangoes that we have here.
Which I've not gotten into yet. Again, I'm going to stick with the peanut M&Ms, going to stick with the sugar, but I think those could be really interesting on the way out.
I'm right there with you, Brian. Liz has an incredible knack for finding novelty gummy snacks that I didn't think, if you were to ask me 15 minutes ago, are spicy gummy mango snacks a thing? I would have been like, I don't think so.
Well, here's the coolest thing is because you go from novelty snacks to novelty tax credits. We're going to be doing a lot of that actually over the next 45 minutes.
There it is. And we're off. We also do have Oreos, Ritz crackers, sweet tart, chewy fusions, and we're not sponsored. So if any of these companies want to sponsor us, please reach out to me at lschultz@cleanair.org.
And we also have direct appropriations and other forms of government programs and energy policies that could also fuel the transition to the future of clean energy. It's perfect. It's a great complement to everything that we're trying to accomplish.
I mean, you should just take it away. I don't think we don't need us.
You really need us, folks, for this one.
No, let's dig into all of it. Every piece, every one of these snacks and every one of these programs. Let's do it.
All right. We'll take them in turn. So as may already be apparent to the listeners, your background is largely in business and entrepreneurship. But that looks like it was an amazing winding journey through software, energy, utility, telecommunications. You've been directly responsible for more than $300 million of commercial real estate development over more than 20 years. It's almost like we're trying to hire you.
No, I mean, look, it's been a real blessing to be able to retain all those roles. Some of that is luck. Some of that is work. You know, having grown up in suburban Philadelphia, there's a lot of family connections and relationships. And my grandfather built a business that obviously was good to the family. But it took a lot of work to keep it going. It took a lot of work to bring together the connections and the relationships. And I had the fortune of being able to spend a fair amount of my 20s doing things that had nothing to do with real estate, spending a lot of time in various industries. And along the way, I got to discover Josh Shapiro when he was a state legislator. I've had the privilege of working with him on a couple different occasions. I've watched him work very, very hard to meet the needs and the requirements of being the excellent politician that he is and to work hard for the people of Pennsylvania every day. And so it's a real privilege. This is a job that he created in part because of the opportunities of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And it was a real privilege that he called me up and asked me to take it.
And your experience even dates back to being a telecommunications and energy executive in the 90s in Mexico City.
Yes, indeed.
Entonces, ¿puedo asumir que habla español?
Sí, es un parte de mi experiencia. Mi esposa es de Venezuela en Colombia. Entonces, de vez en cuando es necesario en mi casa porque sus amigas están hablando en español y es importante de conocer y entender lo que están diciendo.
And as much as I would prefer to continue this in Spanish, half the room has no idea what we're saying right now.
I'm highly entertained.
Tanya's parents grew up working with indigenous tribes in the Amazon jungle.
Wow.
So not only does she speak Spanish, she also speaks two indigenous tribes' languages. Ndoke and Panade, they are communities that are right on the Orinoco River, if you know your geography there, in the case of Colombia, and then close to the town of Caicara in Venezuela.
Wow.
I've had the privilege of visiting them. It's a fascinating experience. And I do honestly believe that part of what grounds me in the work that I do, besides, 30 years of marriage and advertising the wondrous nature of my wife and her patience with me over that period of time, is the fact that, a lot of what you learn when you live internationally and when you go abroad is how the ecology of those communities evolve and how the importance of, the way people live with the land, the way people live with the community should influence how you run a business or how you direct a policy or direct a governmental agency. So there's a lot of different opportunities I had in my teens and my 20s that I think do influence everything that I do every day for the governor's office.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a Spanish teacher, so I want to ask more about that. But I think this is such a great transition to talking about Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And that doesn't surprise me one bit, Brian, that is part and parcel to your background and that you bring that to this work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about the Office of Critical Investments? I think you mentioned that it was created by Governor Shapiro, right?
Correct. And the vision is basically that the federal funds that are available right now under the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, are so profoundly impactful in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that we wanted to have a cross-functional group of people that were responsible for thinking about all the various ways in which we can connect to these various communities and groups together. And ultimately, it comes down to the same thing. Any energy project requires a broad scope of capacity. It's not just the Department of Community and Economic Development. It's also the Department of Environmental Protection. It's also the Department of Agriculture. It's also PennDOT. And you can imagine any one of these infrastructure projects can touch so many different communities. So speaking a little Spanish doesn't hurt. Having worked in, local and rural communities doesn't hurt. All of the things that you can bring to these communities of interest, just not only based on your own experience, but your ability to sort of understand what their needs are and try to adapt these programs to their needs. That's something that government very rarely does well. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you that we're perfect at it by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of the critical opportunities that we have here as we learn about what these vast infrastructure dollars and tax credits can do for our communities.
Now, just for our benefit of our listeners, a little background. The Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, as it's often referred to amongst us wonks, that's one of President Biden's flagship pieces of legislation. I mean, environmental legislation.
Absolutely correct.
Whether it went far enough for your mind or not, folks, it's still the biggest climate piece of legislation the United States of America has ever passed.
Absolutely, it is, and I would actually go a little bit further. It's also one of the most potentially transformative business investment engines in the history of the United States. Ultimately, when people look at the cost of the Inflation Reduction Act to the taxpayers, and passed in 2022, mostly, if not entirely, with the focus of Democratic votes, there is a moment where many in the Republican community might say, "Well, this is such a big giveaway, and it's a this and it's a that." But when you actually sit down and you read the bill and you look at the tax provisions in particular, 2/3 of the costs to the taxpayers are going to end up being those tax credits. And people will look at that and say, my gosh, we're giving stuff away. Well, you're not giving anything away. You have to do the thing to get the thing. It's an investment tax credit. So when they say it's going to cost $500 billion or whatever that number is, recognize the fact that those tax credits are only a fraction of the total investment that's required to earn the tax credits. So if you do some basic math, we probably are going to see $4 trillion of investment in the United States in order to obtain those $500 billion of tax credits. I don't know how anybody could be against $4 trillion of energy investment and ultimately the jobs that creates and the pivot that we can make as investors in our communities towards long-term sustainability of the resources that we use. So from my perspective, it's not a giveaway by any stretch of the imagination. It's for the entrepreneurs that invest the dollars. It's for the workers that do the work. It's for the people that actually earn it because they did the thing. And by doing the thing, you get the thing. And that's why it's probably the best piece of legislation that I'm going to ever see in my lifetime to affect the business investment patterns of the United States.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
Well, we can go a little bit deeper in that area.
Well, Sean is particularly jazzed about the IRA because he helped pass it. He was lobbying in D.C.
I was doing the D.C. environmental lobbyist thing during that whole...
So let me ask you this, right?
Sure.
When you were in the middle of trying to make this work and you kind of figured out at the last minute it's going to go through and oh my God, it's going to go through. Did you even imagine the conversation that we're having today about things like direct pay? I mean, was this something where you're like, oh yeah, we're definitely going to convince every not-for-profit that they can now be eligible for tax credits and they're going to be able to get money? I mean, was this like...
That was the hope, I guess. It was originally Build Back Better.
Right.
And that was dead as far as we knew. Senator Manchin of West Virginia had pronounced its death this December before it passed. It would go on to pass this Inflation Reduction Act that August. But, our mindset was, let's get the best version of this that we could possibly get passed with as much of these very fantastic incentives in there as we possibly can get. And we had lots and lots of conversations about, what are we going to do next? Because, particularly at the federal level, once you do the work of passing something so transformative like this, there tends to be sort of a feeling of like, all right, well, we've done the thing. Now we can move on to other stuff. And that's that. But your job, Brian, and the office you head is that vision that we had of how are we going to translate this?
So we're going to probably detrack a lot of Liz's questions here because I want to dig into this a little bit with you because it's actually one of the most important things for your generation to learn. I'm a 55-year-old, white guy from the suburbs, right? I'm not going to be running this country, right? You guys are going to be running this country. And this is really the first transformative.
Pressure.
You already probably are, right?
Just this podcast alone. Pretty
the
sizable.
Massive influence that this conversation will have, especially
Big
that
time.
Spanish part in the beginning.
I
mean, in the end, right, you are learning what it means to do exactly that, right? So I'm going to give you a very specific example. The direct pay provision, which I referred to recently, which is one of the key innovations in the Inflation Reduction Act. What does that mean? The tax credits that can be earned by a for-profit company can also be earned by a not-for-profit. It can also be earned by a church. It can be earned by a government. Any institution that makes a clean energy investment is eligible for a check from the U.S. Department of Treasury. We don't want to leave any money on the table in Pennsylvania. The Republicans understand that. The Democrats understand that. The law is the law. So how do we incent people to make those investments? Well, some are going to just do it. Right? And as a concept, this makes perfect sense, right? Oh, so they're going to have the same benefits as everybody else. Let's make sure that happens. Okay, great. So now you're in the realm of the IRS having to write all the rules associated with it, right? So now the sausage got made, and now there's more sausage to be made, right? 2 years of fighting at the beginning of the Biden administration leads to 2 years of fighting over the rules of all of these things. And for every day that the clock ticks, right, there's another set of challenges that someone else is going to, have to address on the other side of that. So in November, December, we're working with Treasury on the rollout of these new rules, and they're beginning to produce guidance. There's a website that they've created that's now going to be the portal for everybody to put this information on. We're beta testers. This is awesome, right? We're going to do this, right? So we start reaching out to folks in the Pennsylvania area that could be eligible for tax credits in 2023. And some know it. Most don't. I mean, most is sort of literally like a cold call of like, oh, you got a solar array installed last year. Do you realize that you have a tax credit? They're like, no, we don't understand this, right? So there's a church, I'm not going to name it, outside of Philadelphia here that put a $17,000 array in. This is awesome, right? You could probably get like $7,500, $8,000 back. Let's go figure out how to do it, right? So we're helping them get on the website. We're getting it organized, right? The first thing you have to prove is that you have title to your property. This is a church that predates the United States of America.
I had a feeling this is where you're going.
They've never had financing. They've never had to pull title for anything. So now the church is trying to find title for the thing, right? So they've figured these things out.
I'm going to rudely interrupt.
Go.
So this church is trying to get the tax credits that Sean lobbied for in D.C. that are buried in the IRA.
That's correct.
And you're trying to help them get it.
Correct.
But they have to own the title to their property.
Well, they have to show it's their property because obviously the IRS isn't going to give you money for something that you don't own. So what are the things that you can show to prove that you owned the thing, right? Like you got a title for your house, you got a title for your church. It's the thing that you get when you buy the property. And that is something that is just an assumed fundamental. But a lot of these institutions never had need to prove it because they were there since the beginning of time. And then you have very odd situations like we, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we are also eligible for tax credits. So we're working with the school districts and we're working with our own investor pools. And we're looking at things like, hey, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there are 3,362 licensed non-powered dams in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Hey, how many of them can be electrified? Wow. Interestingly enough, more than a few. Interestingly enough, some of them are owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Here's the problem. Who has the title to that dam? How can we prove that? I mean, literally, these are the consequences, right? Now, here's the good news.
Well, and if I'm remembering correctly, there are more than 300,000 uncapped methane wells in Pennsylvania that are leaking.
Correct.
And one of the issues is that DEP doesn't even have the Department of Energy Protection.
No, it's part of environmental protection. It's environmental protection. No, we don't presently have a Department of Energy in Pennsylvania. That's a whole other conversation we can get into. But yes,
out? How humiliating! I'm trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
You need one more of those spicy mangoes, there, my friend. It'll come out so much more cleanly with a few more of those.
I'll eat my feelings after. You can tell that Sean is the long-term environmentalist of the podcast.
That's okay.
I came from the criminal justice reform space. So the Department of Environmental Protection doesn't even have the staffing to figure out who owns the wells to make them cap the wells. So just to draw this out for the listeners, these things are way more complicated than they might seem.
And actually, that specific example is even worse. Part of the problem is Pennsylvania's regulatory regime for oil and gas dates back to like 1905, 1910, 1920. Texas has better regulations than we do. Why? Because they discovered oil in the Permian Basin and in sort of the broader sense. There's always been wildcatting, but the real development happened at about the same time the EPA was formed.
So in the 70s.
In the 70s, right? So Pennsylvania's regulations are such that there are literally shell corporations that move assets from one to another and suddenly they disappear. And the bond that someone has to post when they drill a well is about $5,000. So your business decision is, I can do $100,000 of remediation to cap this well, or I can just simply walk away from my bond and disappear. And now all of a sudden, we essentially become the owners of all of these wells, right?
We, the taxpayers.
We, the taxpayers, right? So now,
and even better, those corporations can then hire lobbyists to convince legislators in Harrisburg to cap their liability well below the cost of capping a well, which I, of course, say because this happened in Pennsylvania.
And it did. And you were absolutely right. And you know, some of the threads that we're going to encounter today are all about, you know, the dialogue that we need to build with other communities of interest. And part of the challenge in all of this is recognizing that we need to work to address past environmental injustices, and they're very, very clear in so many different communities. And much of this funding can be oriented to that. When we can, though, we also need to figure out how to take these liabilities and turn them into assets. So one of the examples I would use in our circumstance is there are hundreds of thousands of abandoned mine lands that in some cases have already also been taken over by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for similar reasons. We control and we own them, and we have perpetual requirements to make sure that the acid mine drainage that's coming off of those hills don't seep into the surrounding wildlife. And so we have water treatment facilities that we, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, own and manage. So how do you begin to try to turn that liability into an asset? Well, you look at solar. You look at geothermal. You look at how do we transition these into energy properties. And frankly, in the case of the oil and gas wells, there are technologies that are emerging to reuse those wells. So one of the more interesting questions is, hey, if we own these as citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, maybe we too should benefit from those. How could we apply those technologies? How might they look? And frankly, all of them are eligible for tax credits, which means the investments that we make could potentially come back to us in the form of cash from the U.S. Department of Treasury. So all of these become opportunities. So when you ask me, going all the way back to your question, why did the governor start this office? It's because we needed a cross-functional team of people to look into these issues and to reach into the agencies and to begin to contemplate how this could work. And the ultimate privilege of this job is the fact that there will be moments where I've got different people from different agencies that have known each other for years or known of each other for years, but they never actually worked together because of the nature of the silos. So that becomes the challenge. How do you break down those silos? So going from you lobby for a bill, you get a bill. This is awesome. Going from this contemplated of is it done? It's not really done yet because something's got to get done. Federal government spends a couple of years sort of fritzing along, not in a good way or a bad way, but struggling with the performative part of how do we say what we're going to say. Then it shows up with us 2 years later, and we have to figure out how to do it. Now, this is the biggest problem that we're going to face whenever we start trying to figure out how to build coalitions beyond 1 or 2 or 3 narrow groups or communities of people. These are all very hard things to do. They take an extraordinarily long period of time. It is not going to fall into the realm of one presidency or one congressional term. It is a generational challenge. And so what we start here today...
It sounds like you're talking to the next governor right now, trying to keep your job into the next administration.
Well, it's not necessarily my job, right? It's all of the people who are doing the things now that are based on the seeds that we can plant today, right? What I say to my staff is, my job is temporary. There is a point at which these funds are in the bureaucracy. They're either working or they're not. People have accepted it or they have not. And if they do, that's great. It's going to just work, and it's not going to matter who the next governor is, as long as we retain the consensus on the value of the thing that needs to be done. And that's really the fundamental of my job. My job is to work myself out of a job and hope that every single one of these agencies learns from this experience. And frankly, we get young people who come into government, who get this intersection, this transformative opportunity to learn about these programs, to execute these programs, and then essentially treat the business investment that's being made as an essential part of our energy transition, and to communicate the value of that to every single constituency so they can see it in their jobs, they can see it in their energy independence in their own communities, they can see it in the reduced costs of their homes. They can see it in the reduced costs of their water bills. All of the things you can think about that we should be able to do with the Inflation Reduction Act. That is the fundamental challenge that we all face.
Clearly, I think it's been established. I'm quite the enviro nerd here, and I wish we had one of you in all 50 states, Brian, because this...
So here's the thing. Interestingly enough,
I was going to say a similar thing. It sounds like you're really uniquely qualified for it. And that Pennsylvania, and I promise I did not come into this podcast episode planning to try to inflate your ego, but I feel better as a Pennsylvanian knowing that you're in this role and doing this.
Right.
I'm honored you'd say that, Liz. But here's the thing. We have so many tremendous public servants, and this is where I think sometimes people don't value government the way that they should. You know, part of the reason why I became a Democrat when I was in college was because even though, frankly, there was a lot about Ronald Reagan that I admired, I did not agree with the proposition that government was the problem. And that's really what he ran on. To my mind, government is the collective action problem being solved by communities. And you can't live in a world where government is the problem, right? You can argue the government is bloated. You can argue it's too slow. You can argue it's not responsive to communities or businesses. You can argue that it is the source of injustice. You can walk away from any given conversation completely cynical about the nature of political dialogue. But you cannot ignore the fact that we live together on a planet that requires us to work together in coordination, and that extraordinarily highly complex problems require significant interaction with each other to address the issues that we have. There is no other mechanism than government. So that does not mean that, you know, socialism is the option from my perspective, because I do believe markets do the work that need to be done to allocate resources.
You do sound like a little bit of a socialist, and that's something I was going to accuse you of.
Well, it's funny that you would say that, because, you know, these are conversations that are very generational, right? And there's one of the discussion points that we talked about having today was, you know, being an Xer in a world of largely, you know, millennials and Zs, because that's usually what you get in government, at least not in the civil service area, but in the political area. It's the people who came from the campaign. It's the communities of people that are politically active like yourselves. And yeah, there is a point at which, you know, you sort of hear this moniker, right? I lived in Eastern Europe for a couple of years. My first language was actually Russian, and I spent some time, you know, in the former Soviet Union. And I can tell you that, you know, the allocation of resources controlled by government does not lead to the outcome that you want. And I think that the tendency is people look at socialism and they promote it simply because it is in opposition to the thing that they are uncomfortable with. Václav Havel, who was the leader that came out of the prisons of Czechoslovakia and became the president of Czechoslovakia, who was a tremendous writer, an extraordinary thinker, one of his first speeches as president of a free Czechoslovakia warned the West of the totalitarianism of consumerism, the totalitarianism of capitalism, because it can happen. Even though markets may provide better solutions for the allocation of resources, the reality is all of us are afraid that we've lost control of our lives, we've lost control of our freedoms, and those concerns stretch across the political spectrum. So people react to it in different ways. I fundamentally look at this world that we're living in right now, and I look at the innovation, I look at the technology, I look at the blessings that we have and the resources that we have, and then I look at those political moments that emerge. My God, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Good Lord, look at all the things we can do with this darn thing, right? If we can collect social energies across the political spectrum to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish for this energy transition, we are setting your generation up for another 20, 30, 40 years of extraordinary global leadership. And I think that's very important in an environment where the dreams that we had as Xers, which was, hey, we won the Cold War and everybody's going to get along now. I mean, that's obviously shattered. The only thing we can do is recognize the fact that the value of our system today will resonate only if we continue to invest in it ourselves, financially through clean energy, personally through long conversations, difficult moments with people you disagree with, but ultimately coming to that point where we work together on implementation, even on things that we don't feel comfortable with. That's why I'm a Democrat. That's why I work for government. And that's why I'm pleased to be with you guys to talk about it today.
That's our
that
honor.
Makes the three of us here. Brian, you've encapsulated my personal philosophy in a better way than I ever have. And I think, Liz, you sort of point out this these days, you know, you say one good thing about government and like, oh, you're a socialist. Oh, here comes a socialist talking about government and how the good things it can do. You know, but that I think is so misplaced, right? In that I think we absolutely need government to help us collectively do the great things that we can't do on our own and to protect us from the larger forces that as individuals we can't protect ourselves from.
And that is exactly why when you look at climate in particular, I mean, we know that the planet is changing. You know, insurance rates are going to go up. There's going to be damage. We're already past the moment where we can, you know, sort of avoid that. So now we're going to have to make very difficult collective decisions about how we allocate people and resources and capital. And that's really what it's going to come down to. Now, government has the unique capacity, because of its balance sheet, because of its ability to draw resources together to help communities address those challenges. And ultimately, again, going back to the Inflation Reduction Act, what are some of the things that we can do? Well, I've already talked about the tax credits. This is about investments. But now you can also talk about some of the appropriations. We won a couple of weeks ago, it was announced, we won $156 million to do solar for all in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Woo!
Great project that we're going to have.
Deal.
14,000 houses is our goal. And in each one of these cases, we're going to work with low-income communities to try to find the right opportunities. But then you can start thinking about the complexity associated with that, right? You're going to go into, North Philadelphia. You're going to find a community where there's a 70-year-old woman in the middle of February and her boiler is out. She can get crisis LIHEAP dollars. That's from the Department of Community and Economic Development. That's really cool. It's a couple $1,000. Oh, there's a weatherization program. So that weatherization program can maybe help with some insulation and some windows. The legislature passed and the city of Philadelphia has a really great program for whole home repair. Mm-hmm. So now, okay, there's a hole in the roof. Maybe we got to fix that. Now there's some new programs coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act that's going through our Department of Environmental Protection. Oh, you can get a heat pump. You get a subsidy for a heat pump. That's really interesting. Look at all these things that we can do. I know we can put solar on the roof. When you think about that in concept, my God, that's transformational. Now, again, going back to the point, boy, you guys passed that legislation 2 years ago. Thanks. All of those different pieces are in there in various corners, right? We got an extra $180 million for weatherization. We got this. We got that. And yet, in Washington, sometimes there is a tendency to just simply say, we won.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, you didn't. Because that woman in North Philadelphia, it's February, and her boiler's still out. And the only thing that matters is, can we actually get all those resources to her at that moment? And that is extraordinarily hard, right?
Yeah.
So they can just call you if they need help with that?
Oh, that's exactly what's going to happen. Thank you, Liz. That's just what I needed today.
And
Look,
this is why...
What's your phone number for the podcast listeners?
Give him personal email. And this is also, Brian, why I think it's so cool to hear this from you, because like I was saying earlier, I mean, we were sitting around, by we, I mean my fellow environmental advocates, saying, boy, we're stoked about the IRA getting passed, but this is just the beginning.
It is just
we got to get it out to the states, and we got to translate it into dollars to get into people's pockets, or that people actually get the heat pumps on their homes. And that's why it's so cool for me to hear you say all this, because this is what needs to happen to make these big giant federal programs work.
Absolutely it does. But now let me sort of spin something back to you for the next time you have that opportunity.
Sure.
And God willing, you will in your lifetime, right?
Fingers crossed.
The one thing that the federal government has gotten particularly bad at, and this is the reason why, frankly, some people vote for arsonists, is because, and they do, right?
Yeah.
And it happens in various countries in the world. You can just read your history books. It's because you have to be careful not to let the performative get in the way of the practical. So policy needs to be clear, and we need to be upfront about that policy, but we need to also give space and room to make sure projects get done.
And we also need to name which politicians are running on performative platforms and who is actually doing the practical. And
correct.
Not wanting to get too political on this political podcast, I got a few candidates in mind right now. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to Pennsylvania.
Yeah. We don't even necessarily need to name specific individuals as far as performative politicians or what have you. I think within the climate conversation, that whole issue has been performative in the sense that one side brings facts to the conversation and the other side routinely. And by sides, I mean those trying to really, truly fix the problem and acknowledge that it's a problem. And then we had climate denialism for ages. Now there's sort of, well, it's not so bad, or, oh, it's too huge and expensive to fix, or, well, we could fix all the stuff, but China's still going to be polluting anyway, so why even bother, really? I won't name the specific politician, but there was a senator some years back brought a snowball onto the Senate floor. Yeah. You might remember this.
I do remember this, yeah.
And as evidence that global warming was a hoax. And talk about performative.
Look, and in the end, there's sort of the clickbait moments where you realize that someone might not be doing it for the right reasons. But I would also sort of admonish everybody, there's a biblical saying that you don't put new wine in old wineskins, right? There's a certain point where the arguments we've been having for the last 15 years, 20 years are actually changing rapidly for a number of reasons. The energy market in particular has changed. Some of it is because, Russia invaded Ukraine. Some of it is because Hyperscalers are now out building these huge data centers. And now it's because we're plugging our cars in and we are doing things to decarbonize, which are all really, really good. So we've gone from a world where everybody thought that energy demand was flat and what we had today was sufficient and we should just simply do what we do today tomorrow. But now we're in a world where the market has shifted and people realize that to keep up with the energy demand that's beginning to emerge, we're going to need to build like 10 power plants a year starting tomorrow. And I can go through numbers and I can go through examples, but what it's fundamentally going to come down to is this. Looking at, say, a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant, even the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, NREL, which works for the Department of Energy, will tell you that the hydrocarbons are going to be with us for a very long time because we need them as batteries. Essentially, that's what they are. But at the same time, we're going to want to completely flood the zone with all the clean energy we can possibly obtain because ultimately we need to replace what already exists and now amplify and expand it.
I was debating when I could interrupt you talking about building plants, which is something that on the clean air side of thing, we're pretty anti. So
depends on the plant.
It depends on the plant. So let's talk about that, right? We have to look at this from the perspective of what constitutes clean energy, right? Is nuclear clean? I think it's clean. And I think that there is a point at which we need to look at nuclear technologies and find ways to expand nuclear technologies. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pike.
Can I give you a small counterpoint on that?
Go ahead.
We have a colleague who lives near a nuclear power plant, and part of the documents that she has to sign when her kids start school includes, in the event of a nuclear event, do you consent to your child getting iodine?
And look, you could certainly make arguments that any materials we produce creates damage,
Sure.
and how do we manage that and how do we mitigate that? It is
solar.
And look, I agree that solar is an extraordinarily
geothermal.
So geothermal again. I'm happy to jump into that too, right? I mean, we need all the above, right? We do need all the above for now. And over time, many of these technologies are going to emerge because this expanding demand now will bring new technologies to market. And that, to me, is the most exciting part.
And I'll say, so nuclear is one of those ones that environmentalists go round and round about forever because it does not technically emit greenhouse gas emissions in the way that a fossil fuel fired plant would. It does produce toxic nuclear waste, but they generate lots and lots of power. And we could do a whole, and maybe we should do a whole episode just on nukes,
But this is one of the reasons why we're so excited to have you on, because Pennsylvania ranks 50th in the nation in terms of our renewables growth since 2013. That's in solar, wind, and geothermal. And per the recent numbers from Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection, 29% of Pennsylvania's greenhouse gas emissions come from the power sector,
Correct.
22% from transportation, 31% from industry. So we know that the IRA has helped Pennsylvania move up the ranks in terms of renewables growth and work to decarbonize there. And we would love to hear from you what's on the horizon there.
And I should just note, while PA is 50th on that, there were also some territories in D.C. included in that. So I don't think we're dead last, but we've got a lot of ground to make up.
So look,
how are we going to do that, Brian?
I mean, first, the governor's put out, I think, two very compelling proposals. One's called PRESS, one's called PACER. And PRESS is essentially our update of the renewable energy standards for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And there we are leaning into a broader category. And nuclear is one of those categories, and geothermal is one of those categories, because we believe ultimately the grid is going to require a vast array of energy sources. And our goal is to direct incentives to solar and to wind and to nuclear and to geothermal and other forms of technology that we think are important. But dug into that as well in what are called Tier 2 and Tier 3 credits is something else that I'll speak to that I think many who listen to this podcast might find controversial. The idea that, yes, we can produce hydrogen. Yes, we can use hydrogen as storage. Yes, hydrogen can be produced, cleanly through solar, cleanly through nuclear, and that by blending hydrogen with natural gas, we can help the existing hydrocarbon fleet become compliant with the new rules that the EPA has published under 111. And that's to set a threshold for the amount of emissions that future power plants will have. I mean, ultimately, we need dispatchable power to run the grid. We need big turbines to spin. We need magnets to move. We need electrons to get onto the grid. And that's going to come from a variety of sources. So if we can find ways to use the existing assets that we have to help the energy transition, to move it along, we think that's an important part of any energy policy and any energy plan. And we think it's very consistent with the strengths of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
And to that end, there's a quote from the press release: the governor's energy plan will help to cement Pennsylvania's place as one of the world's top energy producers and insulate consumers from rising utility costs as a result of global instability and foreign wars. And right now you're describing PRESS and PACER, right? Which the legislation dropped this week. It's been a long time coming.
Yep.
And for the listeners, PACER stands for Pennsylvania Climate Emissions Reduction Act. And PRESS is Pennsylvania Reliable Energy Sustainability Standard. And that is about the extent of my understanding of these two bills at this time.
So let's talk about PACER for a second.
Sure.
Because, the thing that many may ask, why did we come up with our own version of a cap and trade system? The idea is this. Pennsylvania has a unique space in the East Coast, frankly, in the United States as an energy producer. And although, there is certainly alignment with some of the interests that you might see in New Jersey and New York and other states, we wanted Pennsylvania to be able to set its own cap, to be able to issue its own regulations, and to make sure that we can remain competitive. So what does that mean, again, in practice? We want to look at how we can build partnerships with every company in the energy community that wants to meet this future demand and find ways to do it with clean energy, leveraging the tax credits that the Inflation Reduction Act makes available, leveraging any federal funds that we can bring to bear, and finding ways to enfranchise people who want to see the energy jobs that they have continue. Geothermal is a perfect example. CNX had a press release on this a couple weeks ago. And again, even mentioning a natural gas company on this podcast could get me in trouble, right?
Canceled.
And I want to lift up the work that they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And CNX has been doing a lot of work with us in this radical transparency approach regarding safety. And this is something that Governor Shapiro has been working on for many, many years, as I think you know. At the bottom of these Utica shale wells, there is a tremendous amount of pressure because when you release the natural gas, you release the pressure. High school physics, pressure can turn a turbine.
Yeah.
Pressure can increase or reduce temperature. Now, all of a sudden, there are things that you can do with that pressure. Now they can turn that pressure into clean energy. At the bottom of the well, it's 230 degrees. That's enough for steam. Now, all of a sudden, the steam can turn a turbine. This is the work that's happening out in the West, the Forge, which is the big investment by the Department of Energy to try these new geothermal sources. You dig deep enough, you bring the steam up, you turn the turbine. You could have 24/7 clean energy from the rocks of the earth, right?
Why wouldn't we do that?
Why wouldn't we do that? And Fervo, which is one of the first companies to actually begin producing electricity, has publicly said that it was 70% less expensive to drill to the required threshold than they originally projected. And they just raised $175 million of venture capital to fuel the next 400 megawatt investment that they have there. Now, we don't have the geothermal gradient of Utah, but we actually have some pretty good gradient. And it's certainly better than New Jersey, and it's certainly better than New York. So I look at this and I say,
hell yeah, we are.
Oh, yeah. I look at this and say, all of the people that have learned how to do fracking, which I know, again, is a dangerous thing to say on a podcast like this. Oh, my God, we're going to do fracking. Here's the thing. We've learned to do it more safely. We've learned to do it more effectively. If we can get down to the right threshold of heat, why would we not do that compared to the alternatives, right? Because even though I love solar, you need a lot of land to do solar. That is not just a talking point. That is a fact, right?
Yeah, there's ups and downs to all these different types of energies. And to your point, Brian, that we are not fans, Liz and I. However, that drilling technology that they've been developing over the years happens to be applicable to geothermal installations, to your point.
Exactly right.
I was reading about it recently that installing these geothermal operations is a lot cheaper than it used to be because of the advances in materials and technologies. And so, yeah, to the extent we can really maximize that, I testified in front of City Hall a month or two ago and said they should change the Philly Gas Works to the Philly Geothermal Works. I don't know how much they decided to run with that one, but
Well, he made the good point that they wouldn't even have to change the.
That's it.
The branding's already there. You don't even have to change the shirts, the trucks, nothing. One thing though, Brian, I'm really interested though, and I think almost our entire conversation today has kind of gotten to this, including what you were just talking about, is something Liz and I struggle with is on the one hand, we want to do the best thing, get past the absolute maximum best thing we possibly can for the environment and public health and PA and beyond. That is what we are always shooting for. However, we also have to acknowledge political realities and that we live in a very diverse country and state with many people from many walks of life and many opinions. And so,
and as much as we would love for Pennsylvania's energy grid to be sourced from 100% renewables, that's not realistic. And the legislature does not have a bunch of Liz's and Sean's.
No, that's true. That's true. But let me characterize it perhaps a little bit differently. I mean, this political, but it's human reality, right?
Absolutely.
You're going to go out west in Pennsylvania and you have people who are earning, $100,000 a year because they're working at a coal-fired power plant. And you got to understand a lot of stuff. And, it's not just a matter of sitting around, like Homer Simpson in a nuclear power plant eating donuts. I mean, you actually have to make sure that everything is working the right way. And if something goes wrong, you got to know what the heck you're doing, right? And these are people who have, tremendous amount of social value. And it is their belief that they are doing something important, right?
And they are.
And they are. And so when sometimes it is communicated as it's just a political problem, it's like, it's a human problem. These are people that don't want to hear, and they should not have to hear that somehow they should be vilified because of the thing that they do. They're doing the thing that for the last 30 years has fueled the industrial and information economy in the United States. A good friend of mine who's worked in the coal industry for a long time once said to me, Brian, the coal industry just doesn't want you to hold an Irish wake. This isn't like dancing around on their graves. It's a Shiva, right? They have done wonderful things.
That's fascinating.
You should be speaking about the wonderful things that they have done. And you should recognize the fact that, yes, coal too will pass from the world at some point because we will have more innovative and better ways to fuel the world. But that doesn't mean that you have to start from the proposition that they as individuals are evil. And sometimes that is what they hear. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even I as a Democrat, from what I hear, that is what I hear, right? So I think
that is something that we try not to do.
I understand that, and the present company absolutely accept it. But the challenge in all of this is characterizing it as a political reality sometimes kind of glosses it over. The human reality is this: we're going to need power plants. Maybe it's a geothermal plant. Maybe it's a nuclear plant. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it is a solar array that has certain features and a certain type of storage, which is going to be really, really important. But those are the people that are going to run it. And the lands that we have in Pennsylvania, in particular, the western side of the state, are the best positioned lands. The grid that was built, for all of those old power plants that's available for new power plants. You have the people and the experience required to do it. We as a Commonwealth need to be leaning into that. And then again, when you look at the tax credits, that is the reason why the energy community provision showed up in the Inflation Reduction Act. You get an extra 10% when you invest in communities that were affected by job transitions in oil and gas and hydrocarbons. So Pennsylvania gets like an extra 10% for like 70% of its territory. So in my world, it's less about the political realities. It's more about going to those districts and going to those state representatives. And I don't care if they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whatever label they choose. The question is, what investment can keep those jobs in your community that is going to benefit not just your community, but the broader energy transition that we need to make. And frankly, if all of your people there are used to getting their energy from the ground, then let's get more energy from the ground. Let's invest in geothermal. Right. If your community's comfortable with nuclear because you've had a nuclear power plant, and although, yes, it is scary that you're signing the form, but people are comfortable with the fact that it's there. I mean, heck, we got Limerick right outside town, right? You just drive up 422, you see it. If you're comfortable with that, you have to say yes to something. Progressives say no to things and conservatives say no to things. And it's like, if you don't say yes to something, nothing's going to change. Right. And this beautiful bill that you guys wrote, this implementation strategy that we're trying to build, this social consensus that we're trying to raise, it's all going to fall apart. And that's what we have to avoid.
I absolutely fundamentally agree. I love how you painted that, Brian, that the human element. It really is. It really is. And I think environmental, and so many of us in whatever space you're in these days in America, it's really easy to live in your echo chamber.
Yep.
And hear the same things over and over again and think about like, oh, well, these invisible coal workers out somewhere doing the dirty environmental work. And it's easy to sort of imagine them in that way if you're never going to that place, if you're only hanging out in certain spaces.
Yep. But
you're right. I've spent a lot of time thinking about, there aren't too many people who wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to be a jerk today and I'm going to do like really bad stuff and like destroy the world a little bit. No, nobody, even if that is incidentally what they end up doing, that is not, and certainly not the coal worker who's going to keep the power plant running isn't thinking that at all. Not anywhere close. It's thinking, I'm going to go earn a living to support my family. And this is decent work. And I have no reason to be ashamed of it. Mm-hmm. And we need to power all of our stuff. And I think we can apply this to any federal government, state government, local government. To your point, Brian, we have to work together, whatever the issue is. We're never going to reach this imaginary place where all the progressives win or all the conservatives win and we just leave the other side behind. That just isn't how it works in America, and certainly not Pennsylvania. I'm a big Commonwealth fan, born and raised, but talk about sort of the ultimate laboratory for democracy.
Oh, it is.
Right?
It is.
Practically a 50-50 purple state in every which way you want to slice it.
Absolutely right. And now the advertisement. Josh Shapiro is going to be the best governor Pennsylvania's ever had because he is one of the few people I think that can actually work those interstitial spaces, because that's really what they are. And they're really hard. And, the work that we need to do to support him as staffers and as members of the community that he has brought in is to try to find ways in which we can open up doors to people who have not been willing to speak to the other side. It's the only way we're going to be able to move forward.
That's actually exactly why we started this podcast, because Sean and I have conversations like this all the time about the importance of holding nuance and slowing down reactivity and judgment when you hear somebody saying something you don't agree with, because that's not going to solve anything. And people jump into that and then shut down and then throw their hands up and say, well, that's just government. That's just America.
Look,
that's how it's always going to be.
You guys are playing an essential role. It is not easy.
Shucks.
No, but it's not easy, right? In a world where, the general media consumption patterns are fixed, and most of what you hear is noise. There has to be a moment, and I do think that the realm of media that you and others create, have the opportunity to establish a richness that you're just not going to get in sort of, just turning on Fox or MSNBC or Newsmax or wherever else, source that you have. Because for some reason, they seem to avoid these conversations because obviously it's there's probably somebody someplace who's done the polling and is what it is.
And that's not where they're making their money, from being the echo chamber.
Correct.
And we're stuck in that cycle. And you're right, Brian. It can be easier to gravitate towards your tribe, towards that safe space where I'm going to turn the TV on and I'm going to have my viewpoint affirmed for the next 3 hours tonight. That's easier and it feels good. And yet, I think there is an overwhelming sense throughout America, throughout Pennsylvania, that, and I'm so heartened to hear that the governor and you and so many others in the administration are really leaning into addressing this sense that though it might be easier to hang out in the echo chamber, nobody's satisfied. Like, we want progress. We want stuff to get done.
Yep.
Right? It's progress, small p progress.
Yep.
That they hate to, and I think all of us here too, hate to see another deal fell apart on Capitol Hill, another deal fell apart in Harrisburg, because it's politics get in the way of these common sense comings together, if you will, of people. Because if we do what you do, Brian, and break these things down into sort of these common sense concepts, we all want this. This is all the stuff that we want.
And look, no one can guarantee that anything I say or anybody else says changes the mind of someone, but maybe it opens up the space for common action. And that's the important question. What can we do together? We may not agree on everything. You may not trust me entirely. You may think that I am, from the wrong side of town, whatever it may happen to be. But what can we do together? What's the thing we can build together? And, any moment that we can find something, however so small, to build together that we both want to build, let's build it.
So what can your average Pennsylvanian do to support your work, Governor Shapiro's work?
I say to a lot of folks, in the environmental community in particular, they sort of, what can I do? I was so heartened a couple days ago. Two people knock on my door, League of Conservation Voters. They're handing me, all the IRA tax credit stuff. And I'm like, this is awesome, but, you have to update the 30% now to 40%. And they're looking at me like, who the heck are you? I'm like, here's my business card. I just want to let you know, go hand it up the chain. I mean, these are things that you need to do, right? But okay, so on the one hand, it is grassroots, right?
Yep.
On the other hand, it's, learn about how to find the title for your local church. Learn about how to find the title for your synagogue or your mosque. Learn about, the things that are required to do these deals. Every organization has resources it has to run. So if there's a clean energy investment that you think you can make that clean energy investment. If you ever thought about becoming an electrician, become an electrician. Not because you want to be an electrician for the rest of your life, but because frankly, all those advertisements where like your Ford F-150 plugs into your house and you have to, there's like a disconnect switch. There's a lot of work that you need to do.
Oh yeah.
Even if you don't become an electrician all the time, learn it. Our world is too technical for you to be ignorant of the technical things that support what we do. You don't have to learn everything. You don't have to become a plumber for the rest of your life, but try to find something that practically applies your passion. That'd be the second thing I would say. And yes, talk to your politicians. Yes, advocate. Yes, do the grassroots stuff that you guys do. But at the same time, don't do it to demonize the other side. Do it to raise up the examples of what you think are good about what you've done and your community have done. Make sure people recognize that and celebrate it rather than using it as a vehicle to tear somebody else down, because ultimately that does not advance any of our causes in terms of the things that we need to accomplish together.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous advice. And yeah, if you're curious about the thing, learn about the thing. Everything we've talked about today is complicated stuff.
Yep.
And just drilling down on any particular element is a great place to start.
There's a great book, Once and Future King, T.H. White. It's the Arthur narrative, and Merlin's one line to him is, if you're sad, learn something. If you're sad about climate, learn something. If you're sad about politics, learn something. That is something that can get you through.
It's gotten me through many, many times over the years. I think it's a practice, learning to listen to those you might not agree with or you're disinclined to agree with. You might still disagree with them, but the more you do that, the more you're going to learn and might come to respect that person for what they do.
Yep.
We got a couple important questions we got to ask.
Go ahead.
Do you watch The Bear?
Absolutely.
Nice.
Every minute counts. Every second counts.
Every second counts.
Every second counts.
I love that. Well,
Yes.
you passed that test.
Yes. I have to confess, I still haven't finished the series The Bear.
Oh my
because-
gosh.
I know.
Oh, season 3's coming out.
I know. I gotta
Why are
catch
you
up.
here? Why are you not home?
I know. I really should be on my couch finishing The Bear right now.
The most beautiful part of that show is the continuing ability to forgive, right? I mean, that is what you see. And the redemption arcs don't occur unless we forgive each other. This goes back to politics, right? We have to forgive each other for the things that we have said to each other, because that is one of the things that is holding us back.
Now, my typical closing question, Brian, do you have what you would consider a quintessential pump-up song or a walk-up song? I like to describe, if your base is loaded,
Oh my
bottom
God.
of the ninth
Oh my
inning, and
God.
you're walking up to
Oh my
home
God.
plate,
Oh my God.
what's playing?
So, it's interesting you say that, because I back when I was younger, I used to do the Broad Street Run all the time, and the building the playlist was always an important thing to do. You had to build the playlist to exactly where you want it to be. And ironically, the song that I used to end with most of the time is, from an album called The Black Parade by My Chemical Romance, interestingly enough. It's the last song on the album, not the hidden track song, Blood, but the last song on the album, which is I'm Not Afraid, right? It's that moment where you realize, you shouldn't be afraid to live, even with all of the things, and again, the Black Parade that you were facing. And it was always cool to sort of take the last 2 to 3 minutes and run to that, as fast as I could. And although that is not my generation's music, that is more, I assume, your generation's music. And, you don't really turn to My Chemical Romance for uplifting stuff. It's definitely the thing that I would say, speaks to what we have to all try to do, which is run as hard as we can, run as fast as we can, for as long as we can, because this is a historic opportunity. We have a lot of change to build.
I love that. If you know, you know. If you're My Chemical Romance fans, you know that is quite the album. That's an excellent choice.
Well, it's been amazing having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So fun.
We're going to have you back.
Again, I'm honored to be here. If there's anything I can do to help continue your conversations, I'm happy to do it.
I just can't thank you enough. This has been amazing.
Sure.
And to our listeners, thanks for listening to Cleaning Up Dirty. To help us clean up dirty, follow us at Clean Air Action everywhere on social media and subscribe to Cleaning Up Dirty wherever you stream podcasts.